Welcome, everybody. Today, what we're going to talk about is how capitalists gaslight. And a couple of announcements, though, before I do. If you want to watch my narcissism content, tune in to my Black Sheep's Time to Shine channel. That's where the longer form stuff goes and a lot of the shorts. Check me out on TikTok and Instagram as well. The Wizard of Radical Self-Respect on Instagram and Revenge of the Black Sheep on TikTok. Jared Mello on Facebook as well. So those are the announcements here. And today what I'm going to do is talk about how capitalists gaslight. And I was on the Lyft driver subreddit the other day. Years ago, I used to be a taxi driver. And I used to drive for Uber and Lyft years ago. But what happened over time was being a taxi driver used to be a solid middle class, middle income job. But then Uber and Lyft came around and they didn't have to play by the same rules as the taxi drivers did. And they were able to undercut the competition and then also pay the drivers less. And so what happened was a whole industry of middle class jobs disappeared. There are no more professional taxi drivers, really. The vast majority of them are gone. Now, is it 100%? No. But the vast majority are. And limousines, they took a big hit too. They took a humongous hit because Uber and Lyft, they didn't have to operate at a profit either for years. I think Uber just finally became profitable. But Lyft, they lost 1.5 billion with a B last year. And before that, the year before, it was 1 billion. So in other words, it's impossible for a small business like a mom and pop taxi to compete with a big corporation that can run at a loss for over a decade. It is wild. But what I see, though, is a lot of the quote-unquote corporate bootlicker types. A Lyft driver will complain on the subreddit. And I'm pretty sure Lyft and Uber both, they put plants on their employees that defend the company. They're not officially employees, but that's what they're doing there. And they'll say, oh, if a Lyft driver complains about the pay. But before I get into that, let's go over first, what was the pay for a taxi driver? It used to be $3.25 a mile in New Jersey and a minimum of a $10 fare. So for frame of reference, Lyft pays its drivers 70-something cents per mile. So it's about 5 times less than what taxi drivers used to get paid. And when Lyft drivers go to the Lyft driver subreddit and complain about this, and rightfully so, because they're using their own car too, unlike many people that drove someone else's taxi, Lyft drivers and Uber drivers, they are using their own cars, depreciating their own vehicles, and having to pay for oil changes, tires, shocks, struts, fill in the blank. And people on the subreddit will say, oh, Lyft isn't supposed to be a full-time job anyway. Lyft is only supposed to be a part-time thing. But all of this does is it flips the script. And it's something that a lot of people do. The capitalists, so to speak, is what they'll do. And what happens is someone will have a legitimate gripe and say, and this is especially true for Lyft and Uber, but they have a legitimate gripe. Hey, I should be getting paid more per mile. And I've always felt that's what they should have been fighting for. Not the right to be an employee, but the right to set their own wages as any 1099 contractor could. That's what a 1099 contractor does. They set their own wages and they choose their own work. Both things that Lyft and Uber do not let you do. So they're getting away with not having them be employees, but then they're not giving them the benefits of being a contractor either, besides being able to log on and off when you want. That's it. So they'll say it shouldn't be a full-time job anyway. It's just a part-time job. But the problem is it used to be a good job. And if you're going to be depreciating your car, you should be able to set your own wages. You should be able to get paid more. And if you're going to work for somebody, you should absolutely be able to fight for your rights, to fight for a better wage. But instead, what the capitalists will do, they'll just flip the script back on you and tell you, oh, it shouldn't be a full-time job anyway. It's your own fault for relying on Lyft. Meanwhile, Lyft and Uber, what they'll do is they'll exploit people that are in a very vulnerable position and are desperate. So, do I agree you shouldn't rely too much on Lyft or Uber anymore? Yes, I agree. They shouldn't, but at the same point, it doesn't mean it's okay for those drivers working for them to get clowned over by those companies. Two things can be true at once. Yes, it's not ideal to rely on them, but at the same time, someone should absolutely fight for them to get a better wage, especially since when I was a taxi driver, $3.25 a mile was 10 years of inflation ago, and now it's 70 something cents per mile. Now, if that's not an outrage, I don't know what is. But this is what happens. They will flip the script back on you and tell you you have the problem for standing up for yourself and for wanting to do something better. Lyft and Uber could be a good job, but when so many people are taking a cut from the profit, and Uber and Lyft undercut all the taxis, and it's just an outrage, what happens with it? And then you can fill in the blank with this when they say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Again, another thing where it flips the script. Now, on one hand, I agree. We can only work on our side of it. We can only do what we can, work within our circle of influence. I absolutely agree. But the issue is they don't address any of the possible issues that could also be going on. There are variables involved. Like, people have varying degrees of intelligence. People have varying degrees of personality, work ethic, and other kinds of natural gifts. What is easy for one person might not be that easy for another. There is going to be differences, and it's going to be difficult for some people to do some of these things depending on what their situation is. And the capitalists, they will not validate those realities. They'll just say, oh, if I could do it, anyone can do it. But meanwhile, let's outsource that a little bit. Let's walk that through. What about someone who's stuck in a wheelchair? They can't walk. Can the person who learned to crawl, to walk, could say, oh, I could learn to walk, anyone could. But it's like, no, this other person has MS. This other person has these other variables. Like, there are limits to the positive thinking out there. That's why a lot of times toxic positivity can be gaslighting too, because it doesn't validate anyone's reality. I think the best motivators out there, what they'll do is they'll validate your reality and then encourage you to do better. Encourage you to work on it and say, yeah, I admit it's tough. I admit these variables and obstacles could be in the way, but if we focus on them, they'll just become bigger. And I agree with that. And ultimately, what I think is this. I think Republicans need to hear more of the Democrat message when it comes to fiscal policies and economics. And Democrats need to hear more of the Jordan Peterson Republican message, which is one of personal responsibility. And I don't think this was ever more clear than when I saw Patrick Bet-David interview Kyle Kulinski or David Pakman, or maybe even Sam Cedar. But I think what their audiences need is the other person. They got to see the other person and how they're thinking. And I think that would be the most beneficial. So I think Kyle Kulinski's audience, they need to hear more about personal responsibility. They need to hear more about pull yourself up and take care of what's in your circle of influence. And then PBD's audience, they need more awareness of the issues that Kyle Kulinski would talk about, like the other things, the barriers that make it much harder. This is something that Destiny talks about too, when he realized when he had more money, it gave his kid so many legs up and advantages, and that kid didn't do anything to deserve those things other than be born Destiny's kid. And that's how it is, though, with a lot of things right now. There's a lot of stuff that there's variables and things that come into play that people had no control over. Think of how many things that you don't have any control over in your life that determine a lot of your outcomes. You don't choose your parents. You don't choose your upbringing. You don't choose your genes. You don't choose your personality to an extent. And I've had people fight me on that before, but I think much of your personality and temperament is given to you. Now, you can work within the framework of what you have, but I think the base of it is there. And then you don't choose your height, you don't choose your face, you don't choose whatever your natural gifts would be. You don't choose any of these things, and you don't choose your intelligence. You don't choose any of these things that mean so much and make a humongous difference on what your results will be in life. And I think that cannot be ignored. Like, that's a real thing. It's a real thing that all of those variables are there. Not everyone's going to have the same base level of variables. But that's why I say, like, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a conservative. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a libertarian. I just think individually about almost every issue. And I do think if someone is just going to agree with almost all things someone says, they're probably not thinking for themselves anymore. So the point of this video, though, is to think about when someone flips the script on you, are they validating your reality? Are they saying to you, okay, this is what could happen here. This, I agree, there could be these obstacles. Or are they just ignoring them and deflecting from the issues you're trying to talk about? So if you're a Lyft driver out there, and you have to work for them right now, you are maybe in a desperate spot, you have nothing else going for you right now, and you're working for them, by all means you should be very angry. By all means you should be trying to do better. And I don't think there's a problem with that. I think this is what Teddy Roosevelt was really good with back in the day as well, is he would help people get better deals. And I think even many of the Trump Republicans, I think they could get on board with this too, because that's what Trump did for the Republicans. There was a lot of blue-collar Republicans that Trump, he spoke to them, and they really started to like him. And if those Trump Republicans would listen to some of the messages on other sides, they might find themselves agreeing with a lot of what they say. Now, I think even a lot of them would agree with Bernie Sanders would say in many cases, where it's like, if you're going to work, by all means, why wouldn't you fight for more? You know, that's what all the business owners and people who are very wealthy are doing. They're fighting for every scrap they can get. They're fighting for every advantage they can get. And they're paying off lobbyists. And they have people working on their behalf in D.C. And you're going to say the employees shouldn't do the same? You're going to say the contractors shouldn't do the same? That's why I call it gaslighting. Gaslighting might not be the right term. It might be more like a deflection. It might be flipping the script. But either way, I think it's crazy making. And I think, yeah, if someone wants to fight for their wage, they absolutely should. And Lyft and Uber know exactly what they're doing. They're taking advantage of people that are in a desperate situation. And this happens a lot, mind you. And here's something for a lot of people to consider too. There's not much difference between the people who are desperate and them a lot of times. A lot of times the people who are not desperate, they've just been given certain benefits that those other people haven't. They've been born with gifts. They were born into the right families. And then they have the audacity to think they were born on third base and then think they hit a triple. There's a lot of that going on right now, and it's pretty frustrating. But I try to get everyone to see the big picture, to see the whole thing out there, where it's like, hey, I do absolutely agree with personal responsibility, taking a look at your side of the street, working within your circle of influence. But then I also fully recognize there's going to be some variables at play sometimes that make it a lot harder for people. Maybe there's mental health stuff going on. Maybe there's an intelligence gap going on. There's other kinds of things that get in the way. You grew up from a family that was in poverty, and maybe one of your parents was on drugs or drinking or in jail. Like, these things are going to make it harder. Now, is it an excuse? No. Might be more of an explanation. But I think this is what we need right now in our political discourse, understanding of where everyone is coming from. And the one thing I just can't stand, though, is the gaslighting. is the flipping of the script and the invalidating of other people's experiences with it. I dislike that very much. And specifically with the Lyft driving and Uber driver scenario, that one hits home for me because I used to be a taxi driver and I saw how it was able to provide a good income for people. And then I saw Uber and Lyft come around and they took it all away. And now it's just a shell of itself. Now, I'm not saying that every job should be a $20 an hour minimum wage. I agree with the capitalists on that part that, hey, there's going to be positions that they're not meant to be careers. They're not meant to be something that you can support a family on. I totally get that. But Lyft and Uber and taxi driving, that was something where you used to be able to, and now you can't. That's what really bothers me about that. Oh, and I even forgot, there's an announcement too. I'll be recording my interview tomorrow with HG Tutor, and then I'll probably be uploading it later that day or the next day. But I'm pretty interested to talk to him about being a narcissistic psychopath, about fuel, about maybe Meghan Markle and Harry. And I think Harry, they're going to be in for some trouble here soon. But because Meghan Markle, HG Tutor thinks that she's a narcissist, and I agree, honestly, because she fits the mold. Control, power, social climber, taking Harry away from his friends and family, isolating him, cutting him off from the support system. All the stuff is there. The people that Meghan Markle invited to her wedding, all of this stuff, it's right there clear as day. And I don't think she has as many supporters these days. I don't think they've been able to dig and put their heads in the sands about it like they used to. But it will be an interesting discussion. I'll be curious. If there's any questions that people want me to ask him, I would take a look at them to see if I should ask him those things. But I'm excited for this conversation tomorrow. And to reiterate again, this channel, I want to talk about interviews, things about radical self-respect. My Black Sheep's Time to Shine channels, we're going to talk more about narcissism when I just do solo vids there. But interviews, radical self-respect, and maybe even some political content, now that we're coming into the season here in 2023, the presidential elections next year, here we are. So this channel I'm just going to be having fun with, because my Black Sheep's Time to Shine channel, where I talk about narcissism, that grows much faster. And I don't know if YouTube just doesn't like me on this channel here, but it doesn't let me grow very fast. Now maybe it's because I'm not talking about the right stuff here, but for whatever reason, the growth is slow here. But on the other channel, it's grown quickly. And on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, my following has grown really quickly just talking about the narcissism topic. But again, let me know if you like this kind of political geared content. If you like hearing about the capitalism stuff and how capitalists gaslight, kind of incorporating politics plus narcissism a little bit, because I think the principles apply. If you can break down the content, you can break down the convos of how a narcissist manipulates people and how they treat people. There's some overlap here. There's some overlap of, if you can point out the manipulation tactics, the same goes for politics too. The same tactics are being used because I think there's collective narcissism amongst many of the political sides right now. And they use many of the same political tactics, the narcissistic tactics that the individual narcissist will use. Collectively, they'll use the same narcissistic tactics on a group scale. And it takes, I guess, a lot of courage to be able to point it out because here's what gets a lot of people. They're afraid to disagree with their side. They're afraid to disagree with their friends about things. So they just get stuck in a little bit of groupthink sometimes. But it's hard. It's hard when you really like someone in the political world and then you got to try to disagree with them, a lot of times people see a disagreement as a betrayal now in a lot of these cases, which isn't true, right? That's black and white thinking. You can disagree with somebody and still overall agree with many things they say. Just because you disagree with one part doesn't mean you disagree with everything. Lots of black and white out there, very little nuance. And like I said in the beginning, two things can be true at once. A lot of people seem to struggle with that concept too. But it can be very true that we should take a look at our side of the street and work on personal responsibility. But it can also be true that a lot of people out there are getting a bad deal. There's a lot of contractors and employees that are getting clowned over. So that doesn't mean they shouldn't be looking at their side of the street, but it also doesn't mean it's okay for them to be clowned as well. Two things can be true at once. I know a lot of people struggle with that, but I see it all the time. And if we can just learn as a society here that two things can be true at once, I think that would be a big step in the right direction, because I do political polling. I know I talked to people about that the other day, and I've been doing that since 2016. And I was talking to somebody about doing more, and they asked me, what political people do you really look forward to right now? Who do you really admire and respect? And I had to think about it, and I was like, man, not really anyone at this point. Like, I like some things that certain candidates have did, but overall, I'm pretty disenchanted about all of our political leaders. And I was listening to Dan Carlin's Common Sense many years ago, and he rattled off a quote from someone. Forgive me, I forget who. But he said in the quote that we can't expect our political leaders to rise too far above the level of the thought of the people. And right now, I feel like the level of thought amongst the people right now is pretty low. It's pretty low. A lot of black and white thinking, a lot of tribalism. And how can we expect our leaders to rise too far above that? And I think it's pretty clear we're not seeing it right now. We're not seeing them rise too far above that. And like I said, I like some of the things that DeSantis did in Florida. I like him not getting wild with the COVID stuff. Yeah, I thought that was good. Now, other things, I don't know. I think people get caught up on all sorts of silly things. And both sides are guilty of that, if you ask me. But other than that, I mean, what political leaders do I really respect and admire? I think most of them are in the tank. They're in the tank, and they're just beholden to their corporate interests and the people that have they're lobbying for in their districts. I mean, it's an unfortunate thing right now. I think more political parties was something that could help, but I don't even know if that's even possible anymore, because the Republicans and Democrats just have so much power. And there's no mention of Republicans or Democrats in the Constitution, by the way. That's something that's new. So it doesn't need to just be Republicans and Democrats, but that's how they've positioned themselves now. And there's a lot of tomfoolery that can happen. Even if you're a Democrat out there, for example. It's like, how many Democrats know that in 2016, in the Iowa caucuses, the DNC, the Democrat National Committee, probably stepped on the scales for Hillary Clinton and allowed her to win that state because they did not want Bernie Sanders to win. Like, do people know that delegates did not always have to vote for who the state and the people voted for? If you were a super delegate, you can choose who you want to vote for. Just because more people voted for Bernie Sanders did not mean super delegates had to vote for Bernie Sanders. They could still vote for Hillary Clinton. A lot of people don't realize that. But that's how these parties have positioned themselves, where they can do what they want regardless of what the people say. And the Republicans could do the same thing too out there, in case you were wondering. But how many people know that they can do that? How many people know that they don't have to adhere to the will of the people if they don't want to. They can step on the scales so that their chosen candidate can be the nominee. Now, maybe Democrats would have wanted Bernie Sanders to win the 2016 nomination, and then it would have been Trump versus Bernie Sanders. And what an interesting race that would have been. Instead, they stepped on the scales for Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders, to his discredit, fell in line, but Hillary Clinton was a very dislikable candidate, and it was a non-establishment year, and she was the establishment candidate. So perhaps they got what they got. But now what I think is going on is this. The Republicans are in a bad spot because what they're probably going to do is nominate Trump, but I don't think he's in a position to be beating Biden unless some catastrophe happens, like an economic catastrophe or World War III. But I think DeSantis would actually have a better shot to beat Biden than Trump does. And I can see the future. The future will be this. If Trump's the nominee, he will say, if I win, everything's all well and good. But if I lose, it was stolen. And he's setting people up for that same trap again. And if he loses, there's going to be a January 6th part 2. And I can see this coming like a slow motion train wreck. But there it is. There it is. That's how it is. If he wins, it's legit. If he doesn't win, it was stolen. And I'm not a big fan of that either, really. Like, I don't think that's been good for our country one bit. But that's how I see it right now. But just pay attention out there to when you see people not validate your reality and gaslight and flip the script, especially when it comes to financial matters. Because don't get it twisted. Everyone fights for their own, for what they want. People that are business owners, they're absolutely fighting for money. They're fighting for political influence. As too should employees. People act like it's wrong for an employee to fight for their rights, to fight for better pay. But, they're doing the same things the other side's doing. Except they've convinced a lot of people, oh, you're just a lazy, fill-in-the-blank entitled person if you fight for yourself. I call it BS. Not everyone can be a business owner out there. Not everyone can be a millionaire. The world's not going to work like that. So if you're a Lyft driver, you're an Uber driver out there, by all means fight for yourself. By all means fight to be able to set your own rate per mile. Fight for better treatment. Why the heck wouldn't you? So that's my video today here about how capitalists can gaslight. Again, check out my Black Sheep's Time to Shine channel if you want more videos just on narcissism. This channel is going to be just a little more open, where I have the freedom to talk about more things here because, I can interview whomever, talk about dating, borderlines, narcissists too if I felt like it, and it'll just be my channel to kind of let loose with a little bit and have some fun with. And wherever that takes me is wherever it takes me. I want to also start getting involved in some of the debate bro space too. I do have a lot of thoughts about it that I want to get out there if I can. And I just got to work on getting out there with it to see how it goes. So if you got this far, thank you. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell. Like the video if you liked it. Share this with someone that you think might benefit. Share this with someone that maybe gaslights people when they ask for a better pay. Or maybe share this with a Democrat that doesn't like the personal responsibility argument. Share it with whomever. And comment below what your thoughts are on this video. So with that, thank you for watching. Have a great rest of your day.